I ran barefoot through the muddy road, holding my coat tightly around me as the wind pushed hard against my body. My feet were cold, the ground was wet, and my chest hurt with every step. Behind me, the lights of the village hall still shone through the trees. I had left without saying a word. People were calling my name, but I did not look back. I could not. I had to get away. The words I had heard inside the hall were still ringing in my ears. He never loved you, Emilia. Everyone knows that. It came from Lydia, his ex. I thought she was only trying to hurt me. But when I turned to Jakob, hoping he would speak, hoping he would defend me, he looked away. He did not deny it. He said nothing. That silence broke something in me. I had always been the quiet girl in the village. I lived with my mother in the same small house where I was born. I worked at the bakery 5 days a week, and I helped in the church on Sundays. People knew me as kind, simple, and calm. My life was peaceful. I was not looking for love. Not really. But then Jakob arrived, and everything changed. He moved into the stone house by the river. He said he was tired of the city, of noise, of fast living. He said he wanted peace. From the first day he walked into the bakery, I felt something shift. He smiled at me like I mattered. He asked for bread, then stayed to talk. The next morning, he came back with coffee. He said it was lonely drinking it alone. We started talking every day. Jakob was different from anyone I had ever known. He was gentle but confident, quiet but full of stories. He asked about my childhood, my favorite music, my dreams. He listened when I spoke. He laughed at my jokes. He made me feel like I was seen, really seen. We spent time walking near the river, sitting on the bench behind the chapel, picking apples from the orchard. One evening, as the sun went down, he kissed me for the first time. It felt like something out of a dream. He told me I was beautiful, even in my flower-covered apron. He said he had never met someone like me. I believed him. Every word. We became the couple people talked about in the village. Some were happy for us. Others were not. Lydia was one of them. She had grown up here but moved away for many years. She came back after her father died and worked at the post office now. I knew she and Jakob had been together in the past, but he said it was over. I trusted him. Still, there were signs. He came home later than usual. He avoided questions. Once, I saw him talking to her, and the way she looked at him made me uncomfortable. When I asked, he smiled and said it was nothing. He always had an excuse. Work calls, errands, helping neighbors. He never raised his voice. He never pushed me away. But slowly, he started pulling back in quiet ways. Less eye contact, less time, more silence. Sometimes I told myself I was imagining things. I didn't want to be that person, the one who doubts everything. But the feeling in my chest would not leave. Before we continue, I would love to know, where are you listening from? Which city? Which country? Share it in the comments. And if you are enjoying this story, please subscribe to hear more every week. Once, I asked him if he still loved me. We were sitting on the hill above the village, watching the sky. He looked at me and said, "Of course I do." But his voice was flat, like he had said it too many times before. That night, I cried while brushing my teeth. I never told him. I didn't know how to explain what I felt. Tonight was the village's autumn celebration. People brought food, music played, and the whole town came together. I wore the green dress Jacob liked. I baked 2 pies and brought them to the hall. He said he might arrive late. I saved him a seat. When he finally walked in, I felt relieved, but that feeling did not last long. Lydia came to me with her usual sharp smile. She leaned close and said, "You're still playing house with him?" I stayed silent. "He told me," she continued, "that you're sweet, that you make him feel calm. But love? No, he never said that." I turned to her, my voice shaking. "You're lying." She smiled wider and said, "Ask him." I did. I walked straight to Jacob. I asked him quietly, so no one else would hear. I asked if it was true, if he ever loved me. He looked at me, then at her. Then he looked away. He did not speak. He did not try to explain. He just stood there. And in that silence, I understood everything. So I left. The rain started as soon as I stepped outside. My shoes were still under the table. My bag was near the door. I did not care. I just walked. I kept walking. Past the old school, past the bakery, past the field where he once kissed me under the stars. Every place we had touched now felt like a lie. The tears on my face mixed with the rain. I was not angry with Lydia. I was not even angry with him. I was angry at myself, for trusting too easily, for falling too fast, for believing that love always means truth. I did not stop walking until I reached the edge of the woods. There, I sat on a fallen log, breathing hard, wet, and alone. The trees stood quiet around me. The wind had slowed, but inside, my thoughts were loud. I tried to remember the exact moment I first felt unsure. I tried to count how many times I had seen that look on Jacob's face. The distant, empty one. I had told my mother I thought he was the one. She had smiled but said nothing. Maybe she saw something I did not. Maybe everyone did. Love is not supposed to make you feel small. It is not supposed to leave you waiting, wondering, begging silently for someone to choose you. Love is not a question that never gets answered. But that is what it became. Jacob said he loved me, but now I knew. He never meant it. I stayed on that log for a long time. The rain slowed to a soft drizzle. My dress was soaked and my skin felt cold, but I did not move. I could hear the river in the distance. That same river where Jacob once said he felt at peace. I used to believe that memory was beautiful. Now it just felt false. A scene I wanted to erase, but no matter how hard I tried, I could still hear his voice. I could still feel his hand in mine. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe, in and out, slow and steady. But inside, my thoughts kept racing. Was any of it real? The letters he left on my doorstep, the breakfast he once made me when I was sick, the way he said my name like it mattered. Did he feel something at the start? Or was I only ever a soft place to land until he got bored? I thought about the way he had looked at Lydia tonight. Calm, almost relaxed, like he expected her words, like he was not sorry at all. And that hurt more than anything. Not the betrayal, not the lies, but the calm, the quiet acceptance that I was no longer worth fighting for. A part of me wanted to go back, to ask him why, to make him explain. But I knew what that would do to me. I would sit there and listen, and even if he said sorry, even if he gave me reasons, it would not change what I felt. It would not bring back the girl who had believed in love with her whole heart. Somewhere in the village, music was still playing. People were still dancing, laughing, eating pies and telling stories. Life goes on, even when your heart breaks. I hated that. I hated how the world keeps moving. I stood up slowly, my legs stiff from the cold. I looked at the sky. It was dark and full of clouds, but a few stars had started to peek through. I used to believe that stars were signs, that they could guide you. I did not believe that anymore, but I still looked, hoping for something. Then I turned and walked back toward home, toward warmth, toward my mother, toward a bed where I could hide under the covers and pretend this night had never happened. I did not know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew one thing for sure. I would not cry for Jacob again. When I woke up the next morning, the first thing I felt was heaviness in my chest. It was the same feeling as the night before, as if my heart had become a stone I had to carry. I stayed in bed longer than usual. Outside my window, I could hear the birds and the sound of a bicycle passing on the road. The village was waking up as it always did, slow and gentle, with no care for what had happened the night before. But for me, nothing felt the same. I didn't speak to my mother that morning. She was quiet, but her eyes watched me closely. She offered me toast, but I couldn't eat. I only sipped some tea and then went back to my room. I lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling. For a long time, I did nothing. I didn't cry. I didn't think. I only existed in a quiet space where even my own thoughts were too heavy to carry. As the day passed, I stayed inside. I didn't go to the bakery. I didn't answer any messages. I saw the clothes from last night lying on the chair, muddy, wet, broken, just like how I felt inside. I didn't touch them. I didn't want to relive anything. I simply wanted the day to pass. I wanted the silence to hold me like a blanket. By the second day, people in the village had begun to talk. I knew how it worked. The small whispers between neighbors, the curious questions asked with kind faces but eager ears. I didn't care. Let them talk. Let them wonder. None of them knew what it felt like to have someone look into your eyes and say nothing, to have someone stay silent at the exact moment you needed their truth. I decided to go for a walk that afternoon. I stayed away from the center of the village and chose a path that led through the old orchard. The leaves had begun to fall. The air smelled of apples and earth. I walked slowly, not caring about direction. I only wanted to move. My legs ached with every step, but I kept going. Movement was better than stillness. The orchard brought memories. Jacob and I had walked there many times. I remembered how he once stopped to pick a small green apple, how he took a bite and made a face because it was too sour. I had laughed. He had kissed my cheek. That memory came back without permission, and I let it pass like a cloud. I did not cry, not anymore. The tears had dried into something else. Not anger, not sadness, just understanding. I was beginning to understand who he truly was. Not a monster, not evil. Just someone who was never ready to hold the kind of love I gave him. When I returned home, my mother was outside in the garden. She asked if I was hungry. I nodded. We sat together in the kitchen. She did not mention Jacob. She only placed food in front of me and spoke about the weather, about how the roses were struggling this year. I was thankful for that. For the next few days, I avoided every place where I thought I might see him. I did not walk by his house. I did not go to the shop where he bought his coffee. I stayed on the edges of the village, in quiet places where I could think. I began to write again in the small notebook I had kept as a girl. I wrote about the orchard, about silence, about how love can become invisible before it disappears. Writing helped me find my breath again, but time, as it does, kept moving. Slowly, people stopped asking questions. They stopped waiting for me to speak, and that gave me space. That gave me peace. One evening, about a week later, I walked down to the river. It was the place Jacob and I had visited often. I had avoided it until then. I thought it would hurt too much. But that night, I felt ready. The river was calm, the trees stood still, and the sky was painted with soft clouds. I sat on the bench we used to share, alone, and I watched the water move. It didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. I didn't feel broken anymore. I felt quiet. I felt like I was returning to myself. I stayed there for almost an hour, listening to the wind and the soft sound of the water. I thought about who I had been before him. I remembered the version of me who found joy in little things, who laughed at bad jokes, who danced in the kitchen when no one was watching. I missed her. I wanted to meet her again. I knew then that healing would not come all at once. It would come in small steps, in silent mornings, in warm bread, in clean bed sheets, in long walks and the smile of a neighbor, in learning how to be alone again without feeling lonely. I didn't need his apology. I didn't need his explanation. I needed my own trust. I needed to believe in my own heart again, and so I began to live again, not loudly, but slowly. I returned to work. I baked with more care. I smiled at customers. I started reading again. I planted new flowers with my mother. We had more tea in the evenings. Sometimes we spoke. Sometimes we didn't. But the silence felt safe now. One morning, I woke up and realized that I hadn't thought of Jacob for days. And when I did think of him, the memory did not hurt. It was like looking at an old photo of someone I once knew, someone I once believed in. That was when I knew I had changed. I no longer wanted him back. I only wanted myself whole again. There were still moments when I woke in the middle of the night and my chest felt tight. Sometimes I dreamed of him, not as he was at the end, but as he had been in the beginning, smiling, kind, gentle. In those dreams, he still held my hand and asked about my day. I would wake up with tears on my pillow and need a few deep breaths before I could remember what was real and what was not. But each day, those moments came less often. I filled my mornings with small tasks, sweeping the kitchen, folding laundry, making fresh jam. My mother would hum while she worked in the garden, and I found comfort in the rhythm of her days. We didn't speak about Jacob, and I was glad for that. Some wounds do not need words. They just need time and warmth. I began walking again through different parts of the village. I avoided familiar paths, but found new ones I had never noticed before. A narrow lane behind the school, a quiet corner near the old barn, places that held no memories of him, places that belonged to me alone. That small sense of discovery gave me peace. I wrote more in my notebook. Not letters to him, not about heartbreak, but small notes to myself, little truths I was learning, that I could be alone and still whole, that my worth did not come from someone choosing me, that I was allowed to take up space, to say no, to walk away when love became quiet and cold. Sometimes I sat by the window and watched other couples pass. I did not feel jealous, only thoughtful. I hoped they were honest with each other. I hoped they spoke up when it mattered. I hoped they loved gently. It took many weeks before I felt laughter in my chest again, real and sudden, not forced. It came one morning when I dropped flour all over the cat. She looked up, shocked and white as a snowball. I laughed until my sides hurt, and in that moment I knew something had changed inside me. The girl who had run barefoot through the rain was still here, but she was stronger now. She had faced the truth. She had stood in silence and still chosen herself, and that, I realized, was its own kind of love. Winter came slowly that year. The days shortened and the sky turned pale gray. I wore thicker coats and my hands stayed cold even with gloves. But inside, something warmer had begun to grow. I was still quiet, still healing, but I no longer felt broken. I had returned to my full routine. The bakery opened early, and I would arrive before sunrise to start the dough. I liked the quiet of those early hours. The sound of the oven, the soft movement of flour, the first smell of bread rising. It was a kind of peace I never noticed before. Customers came and went. Some of them smiled in that careful way people do when they do not know what to say. But others just treated me like before, and I appreciated that more than they could understand. To be normal again. To be seen not as the girl who had been left, but simply as Amelia, who baked the best raisin rolls in the village. Sometimes I caught myself thinking about Jakob, not with pain, not with hope, just as a memory, like a closed book on a shelf. He still lived in the same house by the river. I passed it once or twice, but always looked straight ahead. I had nothing to say to him anymore, nothing I wanted to hear. Lydia had stopped coming to the bakery. Perhaps she was embarrassed. Perhaps she simply did not care. I never asked anyone. I did not want to know. That part of my story was over. What mattered now was what came next. One Sunday, I stayed behind in the church after everyone had left. The candles were still burning, and the air smelled of pine wood and old stone. I sat alone in the last pew, holding a folded paper in my hands. It was a letter I had written to myself, a letter I would not read again. It was full of the things I had been afraid to say out loud. Doubts, regrets, the fear of not being good enough. I had written it all, and now I wanted to let it go. I walked to the back of the church near the old stone well. I lit the letter with a match and watched the flame eat the paper. The ashes floated into the cold air, and with them, I felt something leave my body. A heaviness, a shadow. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Then I smiled, small and true. From that day on, I began to make new choices. I painted my bedroom in soft green. I signed up for an evening class in town. Something about herbal remedies and natural healing. I made a new friend there, a woman named Clara, who had moved to the area after her divorce. We didn't talk about our pasts much, but I felt safe with her. We shared books and recipes. We walked along the lake and talked about simple things. Tea, plants, the best kind of cake. My world was expanding again. Not fast, not loud, but with care. One afternoon, I received a letter in the post. It had no name, only my address written in a handwriting I knew too well. I held it for a moment, then placed it in a drawer. I never opened it. I didn't need to. Whatever Jakob wanted to say, it no longer belonged in my life. I had learned that some closures do not come from other people. They come from within. I found joy in places I had forgotten, in warm soup on cold days, in the sound of birds before dawn, in the way my mother touched my arm when she passed me the salt. These small moments became the way I rebuilt myself. Piece by piece. Spring arrived quietly. Flowers began to bloom. The air smelled new. One morning, I woke early and stepped outside. The sky was pink, the village still asleep. I walked toward the orchard. It had been many months since I returned there. This time, I brought a basket and picked apples for a pie. I walked slowly among the trees. My fingers brushed the branches. The memories were still there, but they did not hurt anymore. They felt like a story I had once lived, a story with pain, but also strength. I picked the best apples and carried them home. That evening, as I watched the pie bake in the oven, I thought about love. Not the kind I had once wanted from Jacob, but the kind I was learning to give myself. Love that was patient, kind, steady. Love that did not depend on someone else's approval or attention. I realized that healing was not about forgetting. It was about accepting, about learning to trust again, not others, but myself. I had trusted someone who stayed silent when I needed him to speak. But now, I had learned to listen to my own voice, and it was strong. That night, I stood by the window and looked up at the sky. The stars were bright. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who believed every soft word, every pretty promise. I smiled at her. She was not foolish. She was brave. She dared to love. And now I was braver still, because I